This video is entitled Using the Diagrams.net program to draw a logical data model. It goes along with Chapter 6 of our Introduction to Database Systems Modeling and Administration book. And I'm Dr. Reneau from Shawnee State University, and I'll be taking you through this quick walkthrough of how to do it. So, we need to figure out what we're going to model before we can actually before we can draw a logical data model. So let's think about our grandmother's recipe cabinet or her recipe cards that she used to write all of her recipes down on. Let's see if we can create a simple data model for that. If we think about a contextual model, it would be recipe contains ingredients and ingredients can be in a recipe. So we can see in a CDM, we would see recipe and we would see ingredient. And we would see maybe a relationship like this, that a recipe contains ingredient. Okay, let's also think about an ingredient has some properties or has a very special property that we want to measure, that we want to store, and we're going to call that unit of measure. So each ingredient has a unique unit of measure. Milk is measured in cups or milliliters. Flour is measured in uh, cups or grams. So or maybe it's measured in teaspoons or tablespoons, or whether it's measured in lots of different ways of measuring things. So I'm going to say that an ingredient also has a unit of measure. So a recipe contains an ingredient, and we can say that an ingredient has one unit of measure, but a unit of measure belongs to many ingredients. So that's a contextual diagram. Now let's actually do a crow's foot diagram and you see there's a many-to-many relationship here between recipe and ingredient. So we're going to get rid of that. So let's do a crow's foot diagram here of recipe. Okay, recipe. And then we'll do a recipe ID, which will be the key. And then we'll do the description and serves. We'd kind of like to know the number of servings. Then let's come over here and do our ingredient table. Ingredient. And we'd have an ingredient ID. We'll probably have a description. Let's create our unit of measure table, which will look something like this. Uh, with its unit of measure ID and a description. And we can see in the unit of measure table would be things like cups, ounces, fluid ounces, ounces weight, grams, milliliters, whatever. And we'll see that ingredient has one and only one unit of measure, but a unit of measure is on several ingredients. So we need to put the mini key as a foreign key over here, unit of measure, and that would be ID. And then we want to mark that as the foreign key. So we've now got, oh, we don't have the connection between recipe and ingredient. Well, that's many to many. To get rid of a many to many, we need an associative entity in the middle. And I'm going to call this recipe components. Okay, and there would be a recipe ID, which is a foreign key. There would be an ingredient ID, and there it's also a foreign key. There's a quantity, and these two together are going to make our primary key. Like this is our primary key of recipe, and this is our primary key of ingredient, and this is our primary key of unit of measure. So this implements a one-to-many relationship of a recipe has many recipe content or recipe ingredients, or we call it lots of different things. But a recipe has one of these, and or can have zero or more of these, and these have one and only one recipe, and an ingredient has zero or more of these, and that we might even want to put in a comment on the component. Is it like, is if it's milk, is it room temperature, is it cold, is it scalded, is it hot? I don't know. And we're probably going to need to put instructions in here somewhere else, but let's just model this at this point, and then we can go and add. Remember that a data model is iterative. We're always making changes to our data model, so this would be a good place to start. Let's implement this now that we've drawn the diagram in Draw.io. So now we're back to Draw.io where we did our conceptual data model, and I don't have my diagram shapes loaded, so I'm just going to drag them here, and there are my data modeling shapes that you can again download from the book's website. You'll also find a link below this video where you can go to that website. And there are our shapes. The shape we'll be using today is the entity shape, and that's it right now for this diagram. But let's get started. So we have our four tables that we're going to model. So there's our recipe table, our recipe contents table, our ingredients table, uh, let's just our ingredients table, and then our unit of measure table. So there are those tables. We'll double click on a table. We'll click on a title there and change that to recipe. We'll come here to the attributes, and we'll add an attribute of recipe ID. We'll then come down here with a description, and it serves. We could also add data types if we needed to, but at this point we're just trying to get a diagram drawn. So we come here to this entity, and we'll make that our ingredients entity. And here in the attributes, we'll select our attributes. Come on, select our attributes. There we go. And ingredient ID. And we'd have a description here, and we'd also have our unit of measure. And I'm going to, in my hand-drawn diagram, I used unit of measure spelled out, but I'm just going to abbreviate unit of measure as UOM, which is a pretty common abbreviation for a unit of measure. Um, so here's the unit of measure with the foreign key defined. Here's our unit of measure table with our, or oops, come on, let's, sometimes a little tricky. There we go. Sometimes it's a little tricky selecting exactly what you want in Draw.io, but once you get used to it, it's not too bad. So there's our description on the unit of measure, and now let's create our entity ingredients table, into our recipe ingredients table. So the recipe contains table has a recipe ID, which is a foreign key. It has a, did I misspell RECEPI? I think I've misspelled recipe on everything. Well, at least I'm consistent in my misspellings. Fix that in a second, or not. Let's see. Ingredients would be ingredients ID, which is a foreign key. Actually, you can see that I'm not consistent in my naming of the attributes, and I'm going to go back and fix that because that is important. So that would be the quantity, which would probably be a real number, a decimal number of some sort. And let's put in comments. Now, to get our table to fit, I've just got to drag here on the edge of the table. Nope, let's see, I've got to, nope, got to somehow, oh, got to get that shape to, get that move handle to change. No, I don't want an arrow there. Um, Sometimes again, oh, I got to grab the little dot there. So if I grab the dot, I can go do do do. See, there we go. So by grabbing the dot on the corner, I can change it. And let's fix that recipe ID to at least be consistent, even though I misspelled recipe. But again, I was consistently wrong. So as long as we can always fix that later. So we've got our four tables. Let's add our crow's feet now. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to say I want a zigzaggy line. I like that. I think they look good. I'm going to leave the pointy arrowhead on it to draw the lines, and I'm going to come here and grab an arrow from recipe, and I'm just going to drag it down to recipe contains. Um, and I'm going to hook it to a specific handle. Actually, I don't like that. I'm going to control Z and undo that. And I'm going to come here and I'm going to, try that again. Let's recipe contains. Well, I don't like that. That's not where I want it. So I'm just going to grab that arrow's head and move it. There we go. Let's move it to the entire container. Let's move this to the entire container too. So um, there we go. Let's get this to the entire container. There we go. So now ingredients, I'm going to get its arrow from the entire container to the entire container. Now notice they're overlapping. We're not going to want that, but we'll fix that in just a second, because all we have to do is just grab the arrow there on its move handle. See the little movals? So we can scoot the arrow around and put it exactly where we want it. Um, Ingredients would have a unit of measure. So let's take ingredients down to unit of measure. And then we'll take yeah, that's all of our crow's feet at this point, right? Because a recipe has many contains, an ingredient has many contains, an ingredient has one unit of measure, but a unit of measure has many ingredients. So we now have to change our crow's feet. So if I click on an arrow, this dialog over to the side, we can change our arrowheads. And by coming here, I can make my arrows fatter. I can make them 2 pixels wide or 3 pixels wide, but I can come here and I get to choose all of the myriad of arrowheads that are available. Um, and I don't know why I can't see. I don't know why I can't see um, the crow's feet now. Oh, well, there we go. Okay, so um, I'm changing the recipe side. So a recipe contains one and only one is connected to one only one recipe, and a recipe has 0 or more. So we now have our crow's feet. you can see that a recipe has 0 or more contained items, and a contained item belongs to one recipe. And I can come here and do the same thing again. Again, sometimes it's the things get just a little tricky, and you just have to move things around, maybe uh, resize the screen a little, because it's browser based. Again, sometimes things aren't quite as perfect as it would be if it were an application. And there is a downloadable application you can use. I'm just using the browser-based version here for this demo. So we can see that a unit of measure has 0 or more ingredients, but ingredient has only one unit of measure. A recipe contains belongs to one recipe, and a recipe can have 0 or more contains. An ingredient is contained on an ingredient can be on many contains, and a contained has one ingredient. So that implements the many to many relationship between recipe and ingredients, and our data model is is done. Now we can scoot things around, and draw.io keeps everything connected, but you can see that here it just got confusing because it combined the crow's feet. And again, you might have to scoot when you move things around, you might have to scoot things and clean them up. But that's a that's a real easy thing to do with a tool like this. So that is our entity relationship diagram that we did on paper, that we did on a whiteboard, and then here it is actually done nice and pretty in draw.io. Don't forget to save it as a don't forget to save it as a draw.io file, and then, as I recommend, is to export it as a ping or a SVG file, so that you can use it on your website or use it in your word processing document, or however you communicate this with others. This concludes our video on how to use draw.io to get a logical data model drawn. And thank you very much for watching. Like this video and subscribe to our channel. We'd really appreciate it.